So I was taking a stab at a bunch of projects that are going to be coming up in a little bit. The first one is like set in 2 weeks. It's already set, but it involves the Dragon Ball Z games that you can find on the PS2. Because one, if you don't know, I grew up with them pretty obviously, and two, they're a very interesting subject to talk about, in my opinion, because they vary even from year after year after year. They vary quite drastically. Not only do we have the really weird one offs and sagas in Super Dragon Ball Z, but even just in the same series as Budokai 1, 2, and then 3, which, why is it ordered like this? Nobody knows. But ignoring that, you can see that it changes as you go along. And originally, I was going to organize this just with 3 tiers, but there's a little bit more nuance going on than you would think with a lot of these. So this is just going to be a quick tier list going through of why I think certain games in this listing of 9 are good to great to amazing to whatever have you. And there's going to be, of course, very generic reasonings for some of the best, but I do think there's some nuance to some of the weirder picks. And I think I'm just going to go in order of left to right here because I feel it encapsulates most of what people kind of encounter if you grew up the same time as me. For a lot of people, you probably encountered Budokai 1 and then 3, and then Tenchikaichi, you probably played either 1 or 2, and then you heard about 3. That's usually a lot of the people that I grew up around. That was kind of the route. I was from a Dragon Ball family. My older brothers were really into it, and so I happened to have gone every single game besides Super Dragon Ball Z, which I actually just stole from somebody about a year later. So I ended up getting it, but for all intents and purposes, I played most of these when they were relevant, which is why we're going to talk about Dragon Ball Z Budokai, and we're going to talk about how it's actually surprisingly one of the best games on this list. And it's not because of the main fighting. The main fighting itself is, of course, decent and very basic 3D fighter. I'm not going to get into anything too insane. It's annoying that you have to combo everything. It's annoying that transformations are as busted as is. It's why Goku's one of the strongest characters. Some characters are really, really bad. Some characters are really, really good. And it's mostly because there's only 3 types of characters in the game: talls, mediums, basically, and shorts. And while you can have different sizes with them, it's overall going to be in those 3. And that's why, while I do think the combo oriented strategy of going with it is really, really good, it's a little lackluster. And that's basically every complaint I have with the game. I think the story mode is something very special to look back on, because you go through and you're watching these cutscenes of these iconic battles and iconic moments from the anime that was still airing quite regularly in the West over here. And you, unless you had some fancy way to record it, if you were old enough, or if you had a decent way of getting to actual physical copies, you were stuck with memories and weird stuff that just wouldn't you couldn't watch the anime. So this was a great way of reliving and rewatching iconic moments from, the charge up against Nappa, of course the face off with Vegeta, and even had some what ifs. I think this is one of the first games that really introduced what ifs into kind of not the main focus. That what ifs existed before, but it really felt like it was much more fleshed into the game proper. It wasn't just kind of a write off of being like, hey, imagine if this happened. Brr, brr, brr. No, it was much more like, well, what if? And it really feels much more solid. I also like that there's a lot more, content than you would think at first glance. The capsule system is surprisingly in depth, and while you could just go breakthroughs and call it a day, as we go along, we can see as they fleshed it out, it really was a system that was set up to succeed, and it started here. Budokai 1, I really feel, deserves a lot of credit. Budokai 2 is something that I have gone on to. I If we are to go back as a kid, I actually would say that I played this a ridiculous amount. It's of the three, I did play it the least, but I still played it more than Tenkaichi 1 and 2. But yeah, surprisingly, I am going to put this in exactly mid. We'll talk about uh, how it's barely in here, but basically improved a lot of the combo system, allowed it much more to be a Dragon Ball game versus a fighting game, which is a very interesting distinction. Combos were a lot easier to pull off, characters were added, fleshed out the story. Sadly, the board game is a little whack, but there's mini games, more characters. We still fall into the same trap of there being certain types of characters and not a wide variety of that, which really sucks because while we're not stuck to the original three of tall, mediums, and shorts, it's much more like there's like seven now basically, and this game also has a problem of basically the movement is still stocky, but it's like wanting to push itself faster. It's really whack. It's really hard to explain why the combat doesn't necessarily work as well as even the first game to the third game. But it while it makes a lot of improvements, and I do think the game looks amazingly better in combat, it just suffers from like not being all the way there. It's not fully fleshed out, and while the main story is a little lackluster. Some I think it's okay. It's really just the mini games and the content added that kind of make it skate by into the mid tier. Basically, it's not overly bad. It's not even really that mid. It's just it's not good. It's a step in the right direction, but it's not a full step. Is how I've always looked at Budokai 2. I do like the what ifs. They're really fun. The weird like fusions that could happen, absorptions, really cool ideas. I wish they stuck with it a bit more into it. Would have been nice. But let's talk about Budokai 3. So if you know anything about the Budokai series, you know that Budokai 3 is touted as one of the best in the business. Not only does it go and look at Budokai 2, what it had, and improve on almost every facet, it then takes what you can enjoy about these characters and really put them into an explorable world that, while limited at first glance, has surprisingly a lot of what if and just decent content. The thing about Budokai 3 is content. When we look at Budokai 1, it's surprisingly only have three. Surprisingly, it reasonably only has three modes. And Budokai 2, while it adds some mini games, it still kind of is just the three modes. We're stuck with, story mode, uh, tournament, and then duel. While there is, the Hercule challenge in Budokai 1, uh, it's ultimately the same type of idea as the story mode, and it's not inherently that special. And the mini games kind of take the place of that. So, once we get to Budokai 3, it's all about content. We're looking at like challenge break-ins. We're looking at a Dragon Universe or Dragon World. Sorry, Dragon Universe is Tenkaichi 2. Um, I'm pretty sure I might be flipping those around, but uh, and so we're looking at all of this content. You get to play as the 10 or 11 characters in Dragon World. You have the tournaments. You have so much content to collect. A lot more customizability in the capsules. I didn't really mention Budokai 2 improving on capsules because while it did, it's not overly noticeable. Uh, it, but with Budokai 3, you see how insane the capsule system was set out to be. And I really feel Budokai 3 deserves a lot of credit for being such a solid game for the PS2. If we one day I might talk about my favorite games on the PS2, and this is definitely gonna be high up there. But there is some stuff that I do want to mention as a negative because we have to take the bad with the good. So basically, Dragon Rush sucks as a mechanic. It's just overly bad. Some characters, in my opinion, for Budokai 3 are obnoxiously broken in one to two directions. The first direction, Broken as in OP, and broken as in doesn't function is the other one. It's really annoying because while it tries to improve and make itself a Dragon Ball game along with being a fighting game, it really feels like they succeeded in the Dragon Ball department and kind of faltered too much in the fighting department. They would kind of overcorrect this, and we'll talk about that with Infinite World, but it really sucks that to be what I would like to call one of the best games of all time, it's just missing a smidge in the actual, main portion of the game. But otherwise, this is one of the best games on the console, and let alone on this list. Next, we have to talk about Budokai Tenkaichi. This this is gonna be this is coming from somebody who has played all of these to death. Budokai Tenkaichi has a case for being the worst on this list. Uh, we'll talk about sagas as we get there, but everybody's always going to be in the comparison of saga's the worst, what's the second worst. There's a case to be that Budokai Tenkaichi 1 is without a doubt the worst on the PS2. One, combos are hard as hell to pull off. Not only that, but even if you do pull them off, they're not worth it. It's a little like how Budokai 1 had this problem of just don't do energy stuff because why would you do it? It takes a combo to pull off and it's a waste of time. This one has the exact opposite problem where why do normal combos? Just charge up and use energy. Use your stupid blast stocks and call it a day. All transformations are their individual characters, which is kind of cool if you went the full like detailed route, but some transformations are the exact same as each other. So what's the point? Um yeah, overly centralized camera, which ruins the game entirely. The story mode is really weak, very basic, and yeah, its content is really lacking. Surprisingly, it does have like a few. There's a side mode with Budokai Tenkaichi 1 and 2 that you can then use like a disc change system for Tenkaichi 3. That's really cool, but overall, I'm not really counting them because they're kind of just fights over and over and over and over and over, which is fine, but there's no like inherent gimmick in my opinion that makes it really fun. I do think the we'll talk about the customization more, but it's basic here. It's not as good as the capsules. Uh, and yeah, that's basically it. Next, we go to Tenkaichi 2, which I'm actually gonna put in mid. This surprisingly because I feel like it's just kind of rehashing two different things here. It's rehashing the story mode that we found in Budokai 3 with Dragon Universe. I'm pretty sure that's the right order. If it's not, I'm just flipping them on accident. It's my bad. One of these Dragon World, the other one's Dragon Universe. I'm pretty sure it's Dragon Universe for Tenkaichi 2, but I could be wrong. It's just not on the top of my head right now. But and then it rehashes the bad combo system from Tenkaichi 1. It does have some improvements. You're able to connect a lot of lines better, but it still feels very lackluster in the overall combo improvement. Characters are kind of fixed in a way. I do like a lot of the what if stuff. There's a lot here to like. The game though feels very unfocused. It feels like they wanted too many different things at once, and I feel like it just wasn't ready. This really feels like a game that could have been like the Budokai 3 of the Tenkaichi stuff early, but it just fails. And so they go in a different direction, which honestly, we'll talk about Tenkaichi 3 and how maybe it wasn't a great direction, but overall, it's if you happen to get this game, it's not that bad of an option. We'll just say that. Tenkaichi 3. Surprisingly to no one, this is gonna be one of the best games. Now, this is always gonna be an argument to some people. Do you prefer Budokai 3 or Tenkaichi 3? I prefer the main story content of Budokai 3 over the just sandboxness of Tenkaichi 3, but that's also because uh, while I, while I do love being able to make up my own teams and all that, it's something that childhood me did a ridiculous amount to the point where I kind of burned myself out on the game because there's not a lot of single player content to kind of go through. When you have like a sandbox like idea, And like one of my favorite things is I would imagine different scenarios, right? Like, what if Burter was good, and I like stupid shit, like fan fiction garbage. But I would kind of go through that, and then eventually I would just stop playing because I would go through like 7 or 8 fights, and I would be like, okay, cool, done with that. Whereas Budokai 3, if I were to imagine like a more sandbox offering, if I'm like, what if Oob was a Z fighter in the Saiyan saga or something like that, I'm able to go, okay, that was fun for 5 or 6 fights. Let's go play single player now. And I just go drop in and have a decent time. There is single player offerings and there's decent what if scenarios in Tenkaichi 3, but it's set up in a very just kind of like stage selection way that makes it feel less important to go back and play. Um, yeah, and that's kind of the restriction Tenkaichi 3 has always had for me, is that its content, while in character and imagination is far, far away the best of all 9 here, it suffers from not having content to kind of lead into being more imaginative. It's very weird, but I, eh, depending on the day, I could definitely see Tenkaichi 3 being my favorite, but as a game, I give it to Budokai 3. Infinite World. Now, this is going to hurt a lot of people's feelings. Infinite World isn't as good as a lot of people really like to say. Uh, but we will give it, in fact, a lot, and I do mean a lot of credit. It tried to be much more of a fighting game than Budokai 3 is. Had a huge story overhaul. Mini games were added, a lot of content, and a lot of characters feel inherently unique. The problem with all 3 Budokais before this is that all the characters kind of felt similar to another character, at least at one point or another. Budokai 1 was the obvious problem with, the 3 character types I mentioned. Budokai 2 barely improved upon that. And Budokai 3 improved a lot, but still had some problems where certain characters would have a similar kick and a similar punch, and so you felt like you were the same character. So why would you choose the weaker character that had less good moves, unless you really liked it? But overall, it was an improvement on the fighting engine, but it definitely had a lot less personality, in my opinion. A lot of people um, adore this game, and I'll be honest, if maybe this had come out in a different order, this would probably be much more preferred. But by then, I had grown up a decent chunk in comparison to my infatuation with Budokai, and I really feel like it is definitely just missed its margin. While the fighting system overhaul is very, very good, it's also really, really hard. It, for lack of a better term, not hard as in hard to play, but it can get there's a really high ceiling, and Budokai 3 is it's basically a copy of Budokai 3 in a lot of the content, so it really feels very weird because the floor has been raised as well, meaning that sometimes it's a struggle to get into, and for the harder difficulties, I found myself actually struggling for very frustrating reasons. Because whereas the difficulties in the other games, yes, they're hard and the opponent cheats, you still can kind of cheese out. You can do different options because combat isn't a rock paper scissors, but it it doesn't have that many facets. With Infinite World, all these fighting game changes has kind of ruined the difficulty because when they cheat harder and they kill you, which is a huge problem. Now we're gonna get into possibly the two kind of black sheep. I'm actually gonna skip sagas for a second. We're gonna talk about Super Dragon Ball Z. Now, Super Dragon Ball Z has this problem of being kind of a complicated fighting game for the time. Is generic fighting game to its core. I don't mean generic. I mean specifically fighting game. There's no, oh, let's add Dragon Ball. Yes, there's Dragon Ball attacks, and I do love that there's certain characters that are inherently unique to Super Dragon Ball Z. It's actually really amazing that some characters are just in there. Like, just thinking about it, it still makes me go, what the fuck? But Super Dragon Ball Z has this special quality that I think I I just don't think will ever be replicated in a fighting game because it's so of its time. Uh, it's just it's just really whack to think about it. But overall, you have like destructible environments, which was really cool at the time, especially for like the fighting game focus that it was. Uh, there's also like the presentation of this game is much more manga focused, which at the time when I played it for the first time, and even for several years after, while I had watched the anime, I hadn't read that much of the manga. The most I had read was parts of the Android Saga because that was the only manga volumes I got access to. But yeah, overall, I do think it is definitely something inherently special. Uh, yeah, it's just a more traditional fighting game, but with the traditional fighting game comes a lack of content. It has its normal, original arcade mode, classic, and then you have like Z Survivor, and that's basically it, just in general. But you could do like customization, which is really cool. Um, like I like their custom characters. It's really weird, but Uh, I want to point this out because I'm trying to remember all the characters, but one of the uh, one of the characters I always go back to as being like really cool to see them as like a special character included is like of course Chi Chi is in here, and then you have the focus of like 16 is also here, which plays differently from the other androids. We have Frieza with a weird mecha form that is nice to see. Mecha Frieza specifically has a really weird assault form. Trunks is much more important to this, and Videl is a really cool fighting game character. So yeah, I do think it just suffers from not having enough content that, and also being, while traditional fighting game, it just doesn't have enough there for me to be excited. Also, the battle stages are very limited. There are, I think, 8, maybe. There might be 7. I don't know. There's not enough though, which really sucks. But ignoring that, uh, let's go into sagas. People are gonna be mad. I think Sagas is actually surprisingly better than Tenkaichi 1. Now, when it comes to Sagas, everybody has the same problem. It doesn't work half the time. It's a very button mashy game. Um, yeah, that a lot of people come up with very like surface value detractions from this game, and that's fair. The game isn't good. I'm not going to sit here and defend it as a good game. My only defense here is that it's better than Tenkaichi 1 as a value. You have a content of a decent story mode, and then if you want to go back through, you could play as whack ass characters, Broly, for instance, or you could throw yourself as future Gohan, which at the time was super, super special. Uh, you could play in co op, you could do weird glitches, you can unlock powers, and while, don't get me wrong, it was false advertisement to an insane degree, there's something special about sagas that I still think of as not a horrible game. I don't feel like I'm having fun, but I don't feel like I'm having a terrible time, if that's a good way of describing sagas. Maybe it's not, but overall, I do feel that this game itself is better than Tenkaichi 1, just barely. And it's not a good game. It's not even mid. It's bad, but it's barely bad, and I'll give it some credit. It does have some cool stuff. Uh, Also, sometimes glitches do entice the experience. Uh, that's not to say a glitch game or a game that breaks all the time is good. Just more on the lines of I'm willing to let a glitch go through every once in a while. But yeah, there's my list. It's gonna be relevant for something that comes up in a couple weeks, and then so on and so forth. But overall, I will say this is really hard to keep these in the same order as time goes on, because sometimes I really think Tenkai GT goes higher than Infinite World. Budokai 1 goes lower than a lot of this stuff. And I give a lot of credit to like just the timing of everything. So yes, I understand maybe it's not your list, but this is mine, and I'll stick by it for at least a little bit. And we'll say wait until Monday happens. Maybe they'll change. But tell me your favorite. Tell me your least favorite. And hey, I'll talk about it. I always love talking about it.